There we go. Preparing live stream. Hello, everyone. We are joining you a minute late for my conversation with State Representative Stephanie Thomas, who is a candidate for Secretary of State. I've been really looking forward to this for some time. Stephanie is a friend and colleague, and I am very pleased that she is in this position running for Secretary of State. I think we are very lucky in Connecticut to have her. And before I introduce her, I just want to set up a little bit of background here for those of you who have tuned in before. I've done two other forums recently about how to vote absentee if you wish to do so. First is how to apply. I did a forum with town clerks Darlene Brady from Kent and Linda Emerigi from Sharon on the process of applying and how the legislature tweaked some of the excuses, as we call them, meaning how and when you're eligible to vote by absentee this year. And then just yesterday, I did one with town clerk Sheila Anson from Washington and excuse me, Linda Perkins from Norfolk because absentee ballots are now arriving in people's mailboxes and what those look like. And those were both nonpartisan conversations because they are with our town clerks who are nonpartisan officials. So tonight I'm going to shift gears and because I'm very lucky to have State Representative Stephanie Thomas, the candidate for Secretary of State, with me tonight. And so we can talk primarily about the ballot question that you're all going to see on your ballots on November 8th and make clear what it's about and how we feel about that. So welcome, Stephanie, and thank you for being with me tonight.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. We should tell the audience that we were a minute late because we were catching up. So
it is true. We were chatting, and it's sad that we have to catch up via Zoom, but we'll take what we can get on a dark and
season.
rainy evening. Yeah, exactly.
But I'll also say that I expect this to be fairly nonpartisan as well. I do think the secretary's position is such that.
I agree. I mean only to describe the issues before us and be willing to take a position on them, which I would never ask the town clerks to do because that's not appropriate for them. So yeah. So thank you, Stephanie. I know your schedule is crazy. Mine is a little crazy these days, but I am not covering the entire state as you are. So not all of your events are via Zoom, thankfully, and challengingly. So
well, thank you for having me.
So first, I guess I'll just start off by, in addition to you being a state rep, you are the vice chair of the Government Administration and Elections Committee, which has given you insight, and I know, reflects your particular interest in these issues, as is evident by your run for Secretary of State. So if maybe you could just start off by talking about clearing how we got here, why this ballot question is arriving on our ballots on November 8th.
Sure. I feel like there's a lot of confusion because many of us watch the national news. I found when I was door knocking in 2020, when COVID was happening and everyone was confused about whether or not they'd be able to vote by absentee ballot, a lot of people thought we had things like no excuse absentee voting and early voting. They just thought they hadn't used it yet because so many other states have it. So let's go way back to the Connecticut State Constitution. Perhaps because we're such an old state, unlike every other state in the country, some of these voting laws are baked into our constitution, our state constitution, whereas elsewhere, it's just a statute, which means the legislature can change the law. So for us to change to allow something like early voting or no excuse absentee voting, we have to change our state constitution. So I know you'll ask, so before you ask, a lot of people say, well, isn't that a big deal? Yes and no. We've changed our state constitution with regard to voting many times now. The first time was to allow soldiers in the Civil War to vote by absentee ballot. And we've changed it over the years for things such as to allow poll workers who were working in a poll other than their own to vote by absentee ballot, to allow any number of other circumstances which make up the 6 reasons that we currently had for voting absentee. I'm going too long already, but it's like one of these wonky things. So
Well, and
yeah.
it's worth, honestly, it's worth covering that history because I know that I've had a couple conversations with members of our federal delegation, but one in particular with Chris Murphy, Senator Murphy, when we were talking about, trying to, when he was fighting for several voting rights bills in Congress, and how difficult it is for him to fight for them because it's very quickly sort of tossed back. Well, Connecticut has among the most restrictive voting laws in the country.
Yeah.
And it makes it hard for us to argue against other states who are trying to
People don't
limit voting.
realize, I jokingly say, like Florida, Texas, Alabama, fill in the blank. Many of them, Georgia, are trying to get rid of things that Connecticut doesn't even have yet. We are one of only 4 states in the entire country who do not have early voting. And even our US territories, I like to joke, like you can vote early in Guam, Puerto Rico, US Virgin, American Samoa, but not in Connecticut.
Okay.
And
Land of steady habits, yes.
yeah, exactly. But it's also worth noting that every state is different. So some of these terms are used, but they're not uniform. So when we talk about early voting with this particular ballot referendum, we're talking about early in-person voting.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you nailed that, because I've had in a couple of these forums before, people sometimes do sort of toss out, is this about absentee ballots? Is this about early voting? And I will say, just as a bit of background, when we first voted, in order to bring this to the ballot, we had to vote as a legislature to approve of this resolution twice, because we approved it by regular majorities. At the same time, we had debates about absentee ballots, and because that got even less support, in other words, providing no excuse absentee ballots, and that because that got even less support, less bipartisan support, that was delayed. And so the thing that we pursued first was early voting. We still have an effort in the legislature. We've passed it once to allow the legislature to create absentee ballots, but that is not what this is about. That is for a future day. This
Correct.
is solely about early voting. So,
and I think it's worth explaining because a lot of people don't realize. So to change our state constitution, you have to have a vote by 3/4 of both the House and the Senate for that ballot referendum to appear the following year. If you fall short of that threshold, and that's really, I mean, Maria will tell you that, to reach that threshold is difficult sometimes. So if you fall short of that, each one of us, state representatives, state senators, were elected to 2-year terms. So if you fall short of that 3/4 majority, you have to have a simple majority vote in 2 successive terms, not 2 successive years. The last term was what years? 2021 and 2022. So we did pass no excuse absentee voting, for example, by simple majority. So now it can come up again in the 2023-2024 term, and then maybe appear on the ballot in 2025. If it passes. So the same thing happened with early voting, except the second term was 2021. So now we're going to see it on the ballot in 2022. And I will say it did have, I went back to look, it had great bipartisan support. As I recall, it was somewhere, I believe 19 Republicans.
So yeah, I can give you a little backstory on that moment for those who really want to dig into the legislative history here. We were debating, the original bill had both no excuse absentee ballots and early voting in it. And because we were trying to get that supermajority that you just referred to so that we could put it on the ballot in what would have been 2020, we compromised and we eliminated absentee ballot, and instead in the House just had a vote on early voting. And in fact, I'm fairly certain we got that supermajority in the House. We did not get it in the Senate, which is why we had to vote on it the following legislative session. So yes, amending a
It's
constitution is complicated.
complicated.
It takes some tenacity, but I guess when you're changing voting systems, it's probably not a terribly bad idea to
Not a
have.
bad thing. I will say some people may say, I thought we did this already, and we did. In 2014, there both no excuse absentee voting and early voting passed that threshold and appeared on the ballot. And part of the reason I'm running for Secretary of the State is I think we have to do a much better job around civic education and get really intentional, put some time and resources, not just for kids, but for adults as well, so that voters know what they're doing. I think voters want to be educated. So what happened is people went to the polls in 2014, saw two questions that were poorly worded, had no backstory on it, didn't know what it meant, and many people left it blank, which is typically a sign that they just don't know enough to make a decision about it. So sadly, it did not pass, so we had to start all over again.
So let's go to that then. I do think that we've done a better job this year making it clear, but maybe you could tee up exactly what is going to appear on people's ballots on November 8th.
Sure, and just to make sure I don't misspeak, I did print it out. So the question will read, shall the Constitution of the state be amended to permit the General Assembly to provide for early voting? And stop. That's it.
I think that language is very clear, but here let's nonetheless pursue some of the issues that come from that. So one of them is, well, how many days and how long, and can you fund it, and what are the specifics? That this
Go ahead, you go.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, this is a great frustration of mine. So it's sort of a chicken egg situation. I have heard people as recently as last week say things like, why can't we vote for that? Like anything could be adopted. We could have 90 days of early voting, and that's like too long. And I'm like, that's a false narrative. So like, don't be swayed. We have to allow the Constitution to be changed for the legislature to take up a bill to decide what it will be. So this, I explain it to people. Even if you want the polls to open at 5 a.m. instead of 6 a.m. or stay open till 9 p.m., we need to pass this constitutional amendment. And then, like any other bill in the legislature, a bill will be drafted, people will come testify, people will figure out what makes sense, and it will roll out or not, it'll pass or not. I'm assuming the Secretary of the State will have something to say about the recommendation. And I tell people, like, just don't believe the hyperbole. No one who is talking about this at what I would call a serious level, meaning a legislator or the secretary's office, they're not talking about 90 days. They're not talking about 60 days. They're not even talking about 30 days. When Denise Merrill last made a recommendation, it was for 3 days. And then 3 to 5 is what has come up. And some of that is because we all know, as I know, that implementation is a little complicated because we have this decentralized sort of town-to-town system versus a county system. So we'll have to look at how we can get funding into the hands of people so that security is handled, all the things that you need to open a polling place, security, your tabulators, staffing, etc. Because, some towns, they can't replicate the election every day for like a
Yeah.
week. They just can't. They don't have the staffing for it or the funding. So I'll be looking, the secretary's office is currently doing a study of models of other states. I've been doing my own research and looking into other models. My recommendation will also likely fall within that 3 to 5 day period. And maybe it's escalating where it starts one place and then it gets a little longer. But I would say, I would tell the public that the legislature and definitely the secretary's office is really going to pass something that can be implemented.
Yeah, and I think it's worth, first of all, I want to reemphasize something you said a few minutes ago, which is that Connecticut is one of 4 states in the country that doesn't allow for any kind of early voting. And this is a very old system that limits voting to a particular Tuesday in November, rooted in an agrarian society that is quite hard. And a lot of people who are, working multiple shifts and, and there are all kinds of reasons why having multiple days available to vote on increases voter turnout. And also the fact that if this does pass, the legislature will go through the full public process. We are all accountable every 2 years for what we pass. It will be public and transparent and heavily debated. And so that will come next, and also will require resources for towns. So I represent a lot of small towns, and they're going to need help making this work.
100%. It will have to come with funding. But you just said something that I try to push back a little bit because when we were hearing this bill in the Government Administration and Elections Committee, but also just traveling around the state, talking to voters, etc., I think we have this narrative that early voting is good for like a specific type of person, like someone who works multiple jobs, and like somehow people conjure up like inner city people somehow need some special dispensation. No, so I'm going to debunk all of that right now. Early voting is good for everybody, and I'll tell you all the types of people who have told me it's good for them. There are mothers who told me like, oh my gosh, I couldn't go vote. My little one woke up with a tummy ache and I couldn't get him out of bed with the other baby to get to the polls. It was election day. Too bad. When you have other choices, like you can choose a good day.
Schedule it into your life.
Yeah. AARP is a huge supporter of early voting because anybody, whether it's people living with disabilities or seniors, you don't always know your good days from your bad days. You just don't know. I remember a gentleman telling me the arthritis in his knee was so bad one election day. He felt terrible about it. This had happened years ago, but he was like, that's the only time I didn't vote because he couldn't get out of bed. So there's people like that. I've heard from younger people, college students who are like, oh my gosh, my car broke down. Anyone with transportation types of issues or not reliable transportation, like if you have to borrow someone's car, etc. I've heard obviously people like me who used to commute. I used to commute to New York City every day. I was on a 5:23 a.m. train. But I usually could get home right before 8. So legally, I was not allowed to vote by absentee ballot, and I didn't want to lie, so I made it happen. So those are just a few types of people, and it goes on and on. So
And I
I'm
guess
like,
it goes, yeah, we often tell people, or ask, have you made a plan to vote? And this is part of that. It enables people to plan that vote around the time that makes the most sense for them, because, we get better results when we have more people turn out.
Well, I tell people things happen every single day that are unpredictable. Flat tire, someone got sick, whatever, you got stuck in the office. So election day is no exception. There will be a ton of people who have a personal emergency that they couldn't possibly predict. So trying to do it all in one day, in addition to creating a huge strain on our system and our poll workers, quite frankly, it also just, it's too much risk. I think we should mitigate the risk of and allow people the freedom to vote more than one day.
Yeah. So in connection with this, I think all of us are happy to see that the ballot question itself is so much clearer than the ones that we did in the past. But there is also a sort of a full page explainer, which provides the constitutional text that will actually get changed so that you can see what we will specifically change in the Constitution. And my impression from talking to some of my town clerks is that they intend to post that on their website so that people can, if people want to see actually very specifically what we will do to the Constitution, that will be available. And I wondered if you, because I know what the process was for, so I've had some questions from people who created that explainer and the definition of it. Where did it, what was the process for creating that document?
Lots of lawyers.
Yeah, full employment for lawyers.
No, but honestly, basically it goes through OLR, the Office of Legislative Research, which Maria knows is one of our nonpartisan offices in the in Hartford at the Capitol that do all number of things. But the explainer text, I like to say, needs an explanation. It needs like a plain English. It's very technical. I know like a couple of things I've heard about, a few people just read it and like then call me and say like, what? There was some confusion about this. There was something that came up about a seal, for example, and someone called me because they read it as the people submitting the election results no longer have to have a seal, right? But the seal refers back to like the old constitutional language. So I say like, think hot wax with the, like, and most things are done electronically now. So it was antiquated language. In fact, you'll see it sounds confusing because it says, would eliminate the constitutional requirement that certain copies of election results when sent to the secretary be under seal, but it would not change the statutory requirement that these copies be sent under seal. So like it seems like a conflict, but it's actually not. It just basically, I say just think of it as like you don't need this physical imprint, but it still has to be certified.
Yes, so the security process remains the same, but we're taking the Constitution a little bit out of, the 18th century or whenever this section was written.
Yeah, and our Constitution is even earlier than that.
Yes, away from the sealing wax.
Yeah,
so that's helpful. And then I wanted to, in addition to unless you have anything else that you think we haven't covered on the ballot question, I wanted to just talk about.
Let me just look at, I had some notes. No, I think that covers it. Yes.
Okay. So we have touched a little bit on absentee voting because this is the similar topic and often gets wrapped in. And I mentioned that we did make some changes to the eligibility for voting absentee this year via statute, which basically I have described as aligning our statutory requirements with our with the maximum allowed under our constitutional requirements. So that we've redefined sickness as just not my sickness. It could be a sickness of somebody that I care for. And also to your point, you just gave the perfect example of so many people who are commuting and they don't think they're going to be back in time, but they're not certain. And so they didn't want to sign, an affidavit in effect saying, I will not be there that day. But to allow people the flexibility that it's likely I will not be in the district that day. And so I'm going to be able to vote absentee. But I think there are some other changes we made this year that I also, and those I've covered in other forums really, but I wanted to talk about changes to the ability to apply for an absentee ballot this year, there have been some very recent changes that I thought maybe you could describe for us.
Sure, sure. But I actually want to go back to the other change because I
Right.
get a lot of questions about it. And I think it's important to make sure people have the right guidance. I try to make it very clear that what we passed that took effect this year is not no excuse absentee ballot. Like no excuse absentee balloting means I just want to stay home and binge watch Handmaid's Tale, so I'm not going to the polls. We don't have that. What we have are two additional allowances. One is sickness and one is you're going to be absent from town any part of the day. But it's really important that people understand that every time you submit an absentee ballot, you're signing under penalty that you would not be able to present yourself to the polls for that reason. So I tell people, like, before you do it, like, make sure, what if someone challenged you? Like, do you have a legitimate reason? And the sickness is broad. It can be, I certainly know people who are very uncomfortable still going into a closed space because of COVID or other reasons, like a polling location. There are people who are caring for someone. Like I ran into a woman whose husband was having surgery and she didn't know if she'd be able to leave the house or not on primary election day. These are all perfectly valid, but I do caution people, especially in such a divisive time that we're living in, to make sure they know they're signing under penalty. But a new thing just rolled out yesterday that we passed last year. And that is something that we heard, I can't even tell you how many students we heard from in particular, because it really impacts them, but a lot of voters who were saying, why do I have to print out a PDF and fill it out and mail it in to submit my absentee ballot application? So we have now joined, I think it's about 25 other states who allow voters to submit their application online. And you use your driver's license to do that.
And I'm just going to say from personal experience, I have my son is in college in Chicago, and he meant to fill out his application while he's here, but he didn't do it. And so once he's gone, then he has to print it out, sign it, mail it back and forth. I mean, it's just, if he can get online and do that, this is the application process. You still have to sign a ballot. And so that part of it remains secure, but to allow people to do that online is a huge improvement.
Yeah, I was surprised again when I was door knocking in 2020. So most people, not most, but many people were doing absentee ballots. I was surprised how many people had a printer malfunction, or they were like, I don't have a printer, or oh my gosh, my printer hasn't had ink in weeks, or fill in the blank. And there were supply chain issues. There were just a lot of issues. And people, like, just being able to do it online, I think will be a huge help to many people.
Yeah, so it is an improvement, but I hope the process of rolling that out to the many town clerks in the state and making sure that works for everybody, I think will be
definitely
really important.
I think like anything new, people have to get used to it. Most individuals don't even know it exists yet. There was, I saw some text messages go out if you're on the secretary's sort of text list. But there's not going to be like a wholesale advertising campaign about it. So hopefully we can work out any glitches.
Yeah, exactly. For people who need it, hopefully that's when it will come up. Yeah. So thank you for laying that one out. And then I guess the other topic that I just wanted to touch on in general is just, and this I've talked to, Denise Merrill about, just to remind people of the security of Connecticut's election system.
Oh, you know, much is made about, the new phrase of the day, voter fraud. Um, and it's unfortunate because I think that entire narrative has been driven by one past president and now adopted by many. And I happen to think it's dangerous to put that narrative out there, to make people feel less secure, because there are actual people seeking to fraud our elections, right? Like whether we're talking about foreign interference, we're talking about misinformation campaigns, etc. And I would hate people to have built up a resistance so that if we need to alert them about something that is actually happening, that's actually serious, like all of a sudden it just fades into the background, like, oh, that's more of that election fraud. But that being as it may, I've heard on the elections committee so many things like, oh, this person voted 3 times, but what they meant was somehow there might have been an error and they got a couple of absentee ballot applications, which is very different than the ballot. I've heard,
And it's worth just for a moment
yeah,
noting again, as I have in these other forums, that you at home may be receiving multiple absentee ballot applications because there are several campaigns this year that are sending them to people. That is not the same as getting multiple
correct.
ballots.
Yeah. So basically, registrars, when you're like voting, and town clerks, when you're dealing with absentee ballots, there are checks and balances, there are systems in place. I've heard stories about things like, oh, someone took those 2 applications, sent them both back, got 2 ballots, and voted twice. Like that can't happen because you only have one voter ID number. So there are a ton of checks and balances in the systems. And what I would say, my Republican opponent likes to call me fraud denier, which is funny since the first time he called me that was in a public hearing. And I said, oh no, there's fraud. Of course there's fraud. Every system that exists will have someone that tries to cheat it. Like that is unavoidable. But it's an acceptable amount. And then, people like to say there's no amount is acceptable, but that's just naivete.
Well, it's
There is no
naivete and
system.
also setting up systems that aim for zero disenfranchise a lot of people.
But more importantly than that, it won't happen. There
Yeah,
is no
not
system
possible.
like
Yeah.
around. Like I was thinking the other day, think about like the US Treasury, and how important currency is and the resources that the federal government has to bear on this. But yet we still have people who counterfeit. You try to do everything you can to minimize it and catch it and penalize it, but it's going to happen. So if you say 2 million people voted in 2 cases of fraud in those 2 millions, to me, that's an acceptable risk. But let's find out what happened there so we can close that hole from happening again, and then maybe something else happens. But it's a very secure system. Like every system, you want to keep watching it, figure out where it went wrong, and then try to close those holes.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And I guess the last thing that I wanted to make sure we talk about, because I think it's so important and you have emphasized it in your own platform, is civic education. And you mentioned it earlier in our conversation. And so I wondered whether you could just sort of expound on what you had in mind when you talk about that.
Sure. When I first got into the race, I was just looking to do something fun, or, to get some attention because I was a long shot candidate. So I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to drive around the state and like do civic quizzes, like pop-up civic quizzes. So I literally did that. I would stop outside of coffee shops and stop people coming out. Coffee shops and libraries I found were the two good spots. And I would give them, it was 5 civic questions. And, they were things like name the 3 branches of government, how long is the governor's term? There was and they were all multiple choice except the 3 branches of government one. And like there was something about Ella Grasso being the first female governor. And most people got most of the questions wrong. I think, I mean, I didn't do a ton, but like maybe 20 people. I think 2 got the 3 branches of government right. But what I thought was most interesting is that almost to a person, they were like, wow, I can't believe I don't know more. I don't think I was ever taught this.
Hmm.
Or the last time anyone told me anything about this, I was very young. So I thought if people had access to civic education and it was made easy to understand, I think people want to be educated voters. So long term, it needs to be a beefed up curriculum in school, but that's long term because anytime you add anything to curriculum, something else has to get taken away. So that
That's
is, you know,
complicated.
it's very complicated, and we'll need the legislature. But on short term, and I'm talking about kids and adults, we can definitely do some things like I definitely want the secretary to have a YouTube channel where we can put up some easy to understand, sounds like these public education things that you were doing. Like, let's put together 15-minute snippets on some of the more serious topics and 30-second how-tos on some of the easier things. Definitely want to put together, I call them like toolkits that we can push out to neighborhood groups, churches, advocates, etc., to teach them everything from like what's on the ballot, what these roles are, to how do you testify if you want to support an issue. And on, but really trying to make civics easy to understand. We talked about this explanatory text. It's a lot of legalese in elections, which it is a very specific, precise act. But I think to get people to understand it, you have to translate.
Yeah, and that's really helpful. It reminded me of I got a question online recently about legislation that I authored, and I've been thinking about how to respond to that because there isn't really ever a single piece of legislation that a legislator authors. First of all, we have nonpartisan drafters that make sure that whatever we do, lines up with the existing statutes and gets rid of old legislation, old language that we need to update or, touches on. Often you pass a piece of policy will touch on multiple statutes across our code. And it's a process in which we're all talking to each other. There are 151 of us in the House and another 36 in the Senate. That's a lot of people with a lot of opinions. But people understanding how that process works, and that every citizen has a right to have a voice in that by testifying at a hearing, and that can often be very powerful. I have said many times, particularly when young people come and testify before us in Hartford, it's
so powerful. And I tell people in my district all the time, it's really important that people express what they like and what they don't like. Usually we only hear from people when something's on the table that they're against, but we also need to hear from them when they're for something. During this campaign, I talk about, I think the United States as a country has done ourselves a disservice to think about civic responsibility as voting, because democracy is not built on this notion of you just kind of step in one day. Like, it's about involvement.
And you step in one day, at which point it's a binary
Yeah,
Usually in our
correct.
system, do you want the D or the R or the yes or the no? And that
Correct.
are all, none of these issues are binary.
It's a real disservice. We have to start thinking about the other 364 days a year and what our civic responsibility is to, I say, back up our vote, right? I know sitting in the House, there were bills, we can't be experts in every single subject. And there were bills that would come up that I'm like, wow, I literally haven't heard from one constituent. And I would love to know, because we do surveys, we reach out to groups, you reach out to advocates just to get a feel for what your community thinks about a subject. But inevitably, if I went out to a community event and I mentioned it, a lot of people would say like, oh, that's a great idea, I really support it, or like, ooh, we don't like that. But it never occurred to any of them to let me know. So we really have to start re-educating ourselves, I think, as a country, to be more involved, because I think we're seeing now what happens when democracy is like, it's not a hands-off sport. It doesn't work that way.
No, it's a definitely, yeah, it's an act, requires a lot of voices to make sure
Yeah.
that we're all on board.
We're a representative form of government, so we are the representatives, but we have to hear from the people we're representing as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I know we're up against the 45 minutes that I had scheduled for this. Anything else that we haven't touched on that you wanted to tee up?
No, except I just hope everyone goes out to vote. My dream world would be like 90% turnout. So anyone within the sound of my voice, tell
Yes,
someone else to go out and vote.
I have some towns that turn up over 90%, so I'm very
That's
proud of that.
amazing.
Let's
Yes,
spread the
tell
word.
us how, tell us how. No, definitely just go out and vote. And if you have questions, obviously the secretary's office, your local town clerk or your registrar, are all great sources. And see you on election day.
Great. Thank you. So yeah, that is usually my final word in this. If you are in doubt, please call your town clerk or your registrar and they will help answer your questions. They're fantastic people. So again, thank you, Stephanie, for joining me tonight and helping clarify some of these isures. And I look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Yes,
And
lovely
on
to
another
see
Zoom
you.
screen.
I'm happier to be inside and dry. So
Tonight, I'm very happy to be inside as well. All right. Have a
thank
good
you so
evening.
much. Have a good night.